Within this series of videos, I'm going to be taking a look at the changes made in each of the mainline Elder Scrolls titles. As you can infer from the title of this video, I believe that the series has been simplified and this could be shown objectively, but that isn't my goal. Nor is simplification inherently negative. However, the Elder Scrolls series has certainly declined in quality, in my opinion, as a result of the simplification. And within this series, I will cover the changes which I feel have negatively impacted this franchise, most egregiously. So I won't be making an exhaustive list of all changes. I will also point out some of the changes I do appreciate, and with that in mind, this series will start with Oblivion, as I feel that it is the last Elder Scrolls title with any positive modifications. Also, I just find Skyrim too boring to play in order to do this video, but I will touch upon Skyrim a bit in the conclusion to this series. Of course, a critique of this sort is entirely subjective. This series of videos will be completed in the following manner. With each Elder Scrolls title that I complete, I will compare it with its immediate mainline sequel. I've played Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim for probably over 2,000 hours combined at this point, but I don't want to work solely from memory, and I've only finished Daggerfall a single time, so I can't in good faith complete the Daggerfall Morrowind comparison video till I finish Daggerfall again, so this series will take a while to complete. So let us begin with the changes I feel made Oblivion in some respects superior to Morrowind. First, map markers. Now I'm not talking about the quest markers, talking solely about the map markers. Morrowind had map markers as well, and in fact every single one of the games has had map markers, but in Morrowind they weren't exhaustive as they are in Oblivion, and I appreciate that about Oblivion. I think that that's a positive change. Some people may disagree. I've kind of flip-flopped on this issue a little bit myself, but now I feel really it is best just to have every location marked. Now I don't think that every location should be marked, just at the start of the game, and I don't think every quest giver should mark a location. Perfectly fine with quest givers just giving you directions. I think that's actually a good thing. Every location should be marked on the map once you've discovered. Like once you've been there, it should stay on your map. And like I said, not every quest giver needs to mark places you need to go on your map. Directions are perfectly fine. I think directions are great. The vast majority of quests should not tell you exactly where the location is on the map with the marker. But once you've been there, it should be on the map. Also like the stylized user interface design, especially the various little pictures for the different ranks in different organizations, in different guilds. I think those are all great. All the illustrations on the UI look good in my opinion. Like the way the map looks is cool. The way the various inventory items are drawn look good. I think they should have made them even more stylized actually, so that they look less like the real 3D model. But as they are, it's all great. I like it. It's an improvement over Morrowind's user interface, which looks comparatively pretty bland. Obviously, I love the voice acting in Oblivion. It's a huge step up from Morrowind. Morrowind does not have very much voice acting at all. I think it's a good thing. But this is kind of a double-edged sword because not every single line can be voice acted. I think what they should have done was had a bunch of additional text that wasn't voice acted whatsoever, just so more information could be filled out. If I had to go one way or the other, if I had to go with Oblivion or Morrowind, I would go with Morrowind. But voice acting is a good thing, but the things that it leads to are negative. Like I said, because they can't have every single line voice acted, so they've just stripped out all kinds of flavor text and all kinds of information about all kinds of topics. Like in Morrowind, people have complained about this, but some people like it, some people don't. But in Morrowind, and actually in Daggerfall and Arena, all the NPCs are just walking encyclopedias. Now, I'm not a fan of that entirely. I mean, not every NPC should give you a giant wall of text about, the place they live and what they do for a job and so on. It could have been shorter, but it is a good thing, and it's unfortunate that Oblivion removed NPCs giving you as much information as they did in previous titles. Another thing I really like about Oblivion are the various benefits for hitting certain skill thresholds. Like for the various weapon skills, you get new attacks that do different things. For spellcasting, you acquire the ability to cast more powerful spells. For mercantile, you get different things. For speechcraft, the minigame changes slightly. For acrobatics, you can do a roll, and other things like that. I think those are pretty much, everyone accepts those are positive changes. Those are good things. They're making the game more complicated. They're making the game more varied and interesting. Another thing, and this is a huge thing, I think this is actually a major reason why people love Oblivion. Interactivity with world objects for quests is most noticeable with the Thieves Guild and Dark Brotherhood quests. There are all kinds of world objects with which you interact to do different things. Particularly famous example is when you drop the Minotaur head upon Banelin's head in Bruma during one of the very first Dark Brotherhood assassination quests. And one thing that I did a lot when I played this game in the past was creating black soul gems. Not a lot of people know you can do that, but you see a necromancer do it in one of the Mages Guild quests at an altar. To Mana Marco, you cast, well, you don't actually have to cast anything if I recall correct, or maybe you do, but an NPC, they cast a spell at an altar with a regular soul gem in it, and it becomes a black soul gem. You can do the same thing, although I don't think you actually have to cast a spell at it. I think you just put the gems in the altar. You can just put one in there at a time, if I recall correctly. I don't think you can do more than one at a time, but you put it in there, and then you can wait, and it becomes a black soul gem. That was one thing I did a lot. When I played this game on PlayStation 3 back in the day, I had probably 20 or 30 black soul gems. So that's one thing that's really cool, interactivity with the world objects. Another really good example of that are the traps in Xedilian, pressing buttons to activate different things, different ways to either kill or drive the adventuring party to madness. It's a trivial thing, you're just walking to a wall and pressing a button. But obviously that didn't exist in Morrowind. Very, very few objects in Morrowind can be interacted with like that. One good example is this pot in this Morag Tong assassin's home in Balmora. You can put some poisoned bittergreen leaves in there. That's one of the few examples of world object interactivity that I can think of in Morrowind, other than the Heart of Lorkhan at the very end of the game. Well, at the very end of the main quest line, anyway. One thing that they did really well in Oblivion, in my opinion, is the game world scale, although it's wasted because instead of filling a bunch of space with cities, it's just pretty much empty wilderness and a bunch of dungeons that are all practically identical, and that's kind of unfortunate. That's one thing I don't like about Oblivion. There's too many dungeons. But the scale is good, even though it was ultimately wasted. Also like how they combined short and long blades into one skill. That's a trivial thing, but I do like that. And also like the player housing in Oblivion. Now in Morrowind it is kind of cool that it's tied to the main faction that you join, but in Oblivion it's nice to have immediate access to housing, unlike in Morrowind where you have to wait however long to even have the option to have housing. Now here are some of the simplifications and changes that I feel really drag Oblivion down. There are too few quests in general, but especially for the guilds. You advance way too quickly in the guilds compared to Morrowind, and especially Daggerfall. Guild rank's not a huge deal to me anyway. I'm not super pressed about being the top rank within a guild. I mean, it's kind of cool, but I would rather your progression be more believable. That's just my preference, though. Like everything in this video, it's all personal preference. One thing that really bothers me about Oblivion is that there are too few unique items. Now, I'm not going to check the exact numbers, but I know that there are far fewer unique items in Oblivion than there are in Morrowind, especially if we're talking about, actual 3D models. There are way more unique 3D models. And just for everything, for clothing, for weapons, for armor, even for objects, if I'm not wrong, even just world objects in Morrowind than there are in Oblivion. And yeah, it's kind of a trivial thing, but it just sucks. It's like everything looks the same because, like I said, there's just not as much variety. I also really dislike the removal of all of these spell effects: lock door, slow fall, jump, sanctuary, detect key, detect enchantment, mark, recall, divine intervention, and levitation. Now I understand why they removed lock door, because NPCs can't unlock a door. It makes sense. But what they should have done, instead of removing locked door, was give the NPCs the ability to unlock doors, or make it so the doors can be bashed down, as they could be in Daggerfall. The removal of slow fall and jump, I don't really understand, other than that they didn't want people jumping over town walls because that messes with a bunch of stuff, because you're not actually loading the next cell. So that's kind of an engine thing, but I would have rather they kept things as they were in Morrowind rather than, just completely change everything. I'm not a programmer, okay? I don't know exactly how it all works, but, the exterior in Oblivion, it's fundamentally different from Morrowind. Like, just the way things are loaded. And, yeah, I wish they kept it the way it was in Morrowind. That way, we could keep the slow fall, jump, and levitation spells. I know why they removed Sanctuary, and it's obvious. It's because there's no chance to miss anymore, as there was in previous Elder Scrolls games. If you're in range, you're always going to hit your target. If you swing a sword and they're right next to you, you will always hit them. which I'm not really a fan of. I wish they would have kept chance to miss, just because, in my opinion, statistics should be more important in a role-playing game than, you know, player ability. That's just my opinion. But I like chance to miss. I also like chance for spell failure, which they also removed in Oblivion. I don't like how they removed both chance to miss and chance for spell failure. As for the removal of the Mark, Recall, Civi, and Divine Intervention spells, I know why they did that. It's because the fast travel system that exists in Oblivion, you would have no reason to use teleportation spells. And even if they were going to keep the system the way it was in Morrowind, so if they didn't have map marker, you click on it, fast travel, they still would have removed Civi intervention for story reasons. Yeah, I don't like how they changed the fast travel system. This gets into the next thing I'm going to bring up, the removal of transportation services. So, to me, they should have kept the transportation services and the teleportation spells. And yeah, I just don't have anything to add to it other than that. I just wish they would have kept transportation services and teleportation spells. You'll see in my Oblivion playthrough, I explored practically the entire map, just because why not? But most people who play the game won't really explore anything. They'll go where they need to go and then fast travel back. And if they ever need to go back to that place again, they'll fast travel out there and then fast travel back. It's like, and Daggerfall did this as well, but Daggerfall's a totally different game. So Morrowind is the only one that's really immediately comparable and relevant to this discussion. But the way fast travel works in Oblivion, it really just discourages exploration. And that's why I dislike it. It's really that simple. It doesn't need to be a whole 10-minute thing. It's pretty simple and straightforward. I mean, there's just no reason to explore if you can just fast travel everywhere. I also hate the trivialization of the journal in favor of the quest objective markers. This really kills me because Oblivion has a fully detailed journal. All the quest entries are perfectly usable. You can get through almost every quest without any markers whatsoever, just by reading the journal. But yeah, there's no reason to ever open the journal. You can just go by the quest markers and do that. So that's why in Skyrim, there are almost no journal descriptions at all. Like the journal descriptions are like 5 or 6 words. Sometimes they're a sentence or two. It's just ridiculous. It's because they saw what happened when people played Oblivion, They realized, well, there's no reason to even write a journal description anymore. People are just going to follow the marker and that's it. And I think that really is just terrible. Again, that's just personal preference, but I would prefer to have to read something and then figure out what to do, figure out where to go, than just follow some marker, some dot on a compass, some marker on a map. I also dislike the removal of the axe, enchantment, and unarmored skills, and the total removal of spears. As for axes and spears, separate skills, I never thought that was really a good idea. The melee weapon skills that I would have come up with just from the start, like if we're talking about the very first Elder Scrolls game and the ones that I think should have been maintained into the later entries. So I would have come up with blades, polearms, and blunt weaponry. I think those are perfectly good categories, and I think they're more believable than the way that they were even in Morrowind, where, axes and spears and warhammers are just totally distinct and different from one another, and so are daggers and long blades, short swords and long swords. It's like these are pretty arbitrary classifications. I don't think that's very good. But they shouldn't have stripped it down even further. They should have just done something totally different instead of removing, the axe skill and removing spears from the game altogether. They should have reclassified all these weapons into new categories. Like I said, I would have done blunt weapons, polearms, and swords. And removing enchanting, I think that was a terrible idea too. I mean, the enchanting skill in Morrowind just did so much. It affected how much, of a charge it actually took to use an item. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, it affects the recharge rate of items. It affects your chance to actually create an enchantment, which I thought was cool. And removing the unarmored skill is also terrible in my opinion, but again, I know why they did it. It's because there's no chance to miss anymore. There's no chance to hit. If the target is in range, the hit is guaranteed. Another thing I dislike is you can no longer hold attacks. You have to time them exactly in order to land a hit. I also dislike the limitations placed upon enchanting. So, certain spell effects and certain spells can only be applied to certain pieces of equipment, unlike in Morrowind, where you could apply any spell effect to any piece of equipment. I also dislike the simplification of the armor system. So instead of having bracers, pauldrons, a cuirass, leg armor, and boots, Now it's just boots, greaves, cuirass, and helmet. So 4 pieces of armor. And I dislike that obviously because you can't place as many enchantments on equipment, and obviously you can't wear clothing with armor at all in Oblivion or Skyrim for that matter. So again, just far fewer possibilities regarding enchanting. I guess they probably did it for, balance reasons, but I don't think an RPG should be balanced, especially towards the end game. I think towards the end game, the player should be extremely overpowered, at least an RPG like the Elder Scrolls. I mean, that's what the early Elder Scrolls titles were famous for, Arena, Daggerfall, Morrowind, even Battlespire, to an extent. You could become extremely powerful towards the end game. And that was part of the fun, Well, even Oblivion, you can still be incredibly powerful. I mean, in Oblivion, you can become impervious to all damage. So I don't really know why they would give you, fewer pieces of equipment that you could wear at once if balance is what they were worried about. Maybe they weren't worried about balance. I don't know exactly why they did it. You'd have to ask the developers why they removed, the ability to wear clothing over armor. But I'm guessing that's why. Also, Oblivion has no real faction system. Now, Morrowind had a faction system, but didn't really make much use of it, which is unfortunate, but they shouldn't have removed the faction system altogether. What they should have done was given it more importance in Oblivion, so that, you can't join certain factions if you're, part of a conflicting faction. They should have made more factions in the game joinable. In my opinion, you should have been able to complete Oblivion by joining the Mythic Dawn, even early from the game. Like, you should have been able to join them as soon as you left the sewers, really. Or actually, maybe even as soon as the Emperor was assassinated, you could have at least had the option of leaving without, engaging them in battle. Maybe the Emperor's assassin tells you to stand aside and you do so, and they murder the rest of the Blades and go your separate ways. Something like that. The faction system as it exists in Morrowind is pretty trivial. So, the solution was not removing the faction system altogether. They should have expanded it. They should have made it more important, as it was in earlier Elder Scrolls titles. I'm going off the top of my head, but it was somewhat important in Daggerfall from what I recall. I'll touch upon this again when I do my Daggerfall Morrowind comparison video. But, the solution for the trivial, conflicts between factions in Morrowind was not, totally doing away with the faction system, the disposition reaction system. They should have expanded upon it. They should have made it more significant. They should have placed more limitations upon factions and which ones you can and can't join. And for a very final note, I dislike the removal of crossbows, throwing knives, stars, and darts. That's a very minor thing, but in Oblivion, obviously, the only equipment people who use the marksman skill have available are bows and arrows, which, for obvious reasons, are not very good for quick attacks. It would have been cool if they kept crossbows, throwing knives, stars, and darts in the game, because all those are relatively quick compared to a bow and arrow, but it is what it is. It's a relatively trivial one. Still unfortunate. So those are all of my main complaints about Oblivion. Those are all the things I dislike about it. One very final note that I forgot to mention regarding the enchantment system, and this really bugs me because I love to exploit this in Morrowind. They removed the cast on use enchantments on objects in Oblivion, so you can't just carry around, dozens of rings that have different enchantments that just automatically recharge over time, because they did away with that in Oblivion also. In Oblivion, enchanted items don't just recharge on their own. But also, you can't just, like I said, carry around dozens of rings with different enchantments and use them whenever. Because, certain objects only have certain enchantments, and they're constant effects, and usually they're pretty weak. Unlike in Morrowind, where there are all kinds of rings that, can kill some of the most powerful enemies in the game in 1 or 2 uses. And those rings weigh basically nothing, and they're practically everywhere, and they're extremely cheap. And again, it's kind of like the removal of armor layers. It seems like they did it so the characters didn't become ridiculously overpowered, but you can become ridiculously overpowered in Oblivion anyway, so I don't know exactly why they decided to remove cast on use enchantments. You'd have to ask the developers, but it's just one aspect of the game that was really fun that they seem to have removed for no discernible reason. Like I said, unlike in Morrowind, you can't just carry around, 20 or 30 rings and cast hundreds of fireballs and levitate and do whatever you want at any time. So, yeah. I don't even know how I forgot to mention these positive things that Oblivion brought to the table. The first thing, NPC schedules, of course, that's great. I'm sure pretty much everyone can agree that NPC schedules are great. But one downside of them is that NPCs, especially the quest-giving NPCs, can be killed by various creatures. Of course, they tried to rectify this with the essential NPC status, but they didn't give all quest-giving or quest-essential NPCs essential status, unfortunately. They also made it so that NPCs will actually defend you, unlike in Morrowind, where really only town guards will defend you from wild creatures. Oblivion made it so that NPCs from your faction will defend you from other NPCs and creatures from different groups will fight one another, so undead will fight wildlife, and Daedra will fight everything, and so on. That's a pretty interesting dynamic. That's a great thing to add to the game. And of course, they also added, and this is a gigantic change, this is really positive in my opinion, NPCs can transition to different cells as you can. So you can't just walk out a door, heal, walk back through the door, and fight whatever enemy you were fighting. They'll follow you across the entire game world. That's great. So those are 3 positive things that Oblivion brought to the table that I neglected to mention in the original cut of this video.